Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Unleashed, a special episode that is for Pride Month. And this is Pup Twigs, and joining me all the way from that long distance over to Daytona is Pup Markosias. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I am good here and everything. So I know Pride season is up on us now, and I wanted to find out, how do you personally define pride for yourself?
So for me, I've had this discussion with other people before, and obviously there have been pups in the community that talk about this, but as a pup with a critter background, it really should be remembered and defined as how it started, which was a riot. A lot of people have, differing beliefs of what, pride should be and shouldn't be, and essentially for me, it's never been an event that other like corporations and stuff should be a part of. It should be something that we look back on our past and, we understand that it started with nobody, respecting us and ultimately us finally defining the moment of saying, hey, that's it, we're done. Like we want to do something about us. We deserve to have the rights. We deserve to be here. So that's how I've always personally defined pride is, it's a protest is what it is.
Okay, and I totally understand that, and I believe in that brick that was thrown back then that kind of started this whole thing.
Oh yeah.
What does pride represent to you in terms of your identity?
So for me, I do identify as, obviously a queer trans critter. For me, pride has basically I have gone through all kinds of stages before I came out as, obviously a trans man. I
Hmm.
identified as a lesbian, I identified as pansexual. Um, I identified as, I was like, well, I don't really know what my gender is. I just know that I'm not a girl. And then, ultimately evolving into what I am now, which is, a queer trans man.
Hmm.
But pride was what was able to let me find that, to be able to understand that, here in Daytona, we didn't have a whole lot of education on LGBTQIA like sources here. When I was growing up, I didn't even know what trans was. I'd never even heard of the word. And so I was left in the dark of I don't feel like a girl, but I'm stuck in this body and there's nothing I know about to do. And it wasn't until I went to my first Pride that I saw trans people and I was like, wait, you can actually do something about the way you feel. You can actually change yourself and actually like be able to love the body you're in and not just feel, miserable all the time. And the same with, coming out and realizing I could be, queer. I was like, wait a minute, I can actually like who I want to like. I can
Yeah.
do what it's just amazing. Like pride literally opens up the gates for so many people to better understand and be able to better, associate themselves, be able to find like a space for them to actually feel comfortable in.
Hmm. Well, what aspects of pride are most important to you? What parts of it?
So for me, the most important part is, just the fact that we have so much history, and the ability for all of us to come together and realize that there's so many facets of the community that, aren't always seen. So when we go, for example, when we go to St. Pete Pride, we meet so many people that are, even for us, for the critter community, how many people come up to us at Pride every year and be like, what is this? How do I get involved? Do I have to do a certain thing? Like how do I find resources? I mean, it allows people to find different aspects. So, for example, I'm asexual, I'm aromantic. So I can find people who, fly those flags and I can say, hey, I am too. And it just opens up, you make more friends, you understand things better. And for people who, don't know about things, they ask. So, if you're not trans, but you want to know, how can I better help my friends out? I mean, there's no better way to do so than during Pride when all of these resources and everything is openly available.
Oh yeah, and in one location.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and then you have it throughout the year. Luckily in Florida here, we have it over the summer in June with St. Pete. And then, I mean, they just had Tampa Pride. And then in October, we have Orlando Pride. So it's like actually like an ongoing kind of thing, too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, how has your understanding of pride evolved over time?
So like I said, when I grew up down here in Daytona. I moved from Texas to here, and I didn't even know what Pride was. I knew it was like a huge event that everyone always went to. If you were, gay, and I was like, well, I don't know if I'm allowed there. And it wasn't until I was much older when I finally was like, you know what, like I need to actually understand what this is. And that's when I understood, like, oh, this started as a riot. This started at a gay bar, and it was Martha P. Johnson and everyone that was like, hey, wait a minute. We're tired of the cops constantly, coming in here arresting us. I
Mm,
mean, you had, people having to dress, like the cross dress is what, the term was back then, but in order to switch partners when cops came in so that they wouldn't get arrested for wearing the wrong clothes. And
yeah,
people don't understand the history of it wasn't just a gay bar, it was a place where people were able to be themselves. Where, you had women who wore, men's clothes and vice versa. And
right.
if in that time, if you were walking around the street looking like that, they would just arrest you on the spot. You couldn't have a woman wearing men's clothes. You couldn't have a man wearing
Hmm.
women's, it didn't matter if you were, trans, if you were, whatever the different terms were back then. All it mattered was, you're not conforming. You're not, fitting the thing. And, speaking of the history of it, you also talk about, the fact that, Germany had its own, sex clinic where they actually discovered or they did research on trans people, throughout the time. And, we also go into the point that, the Nazis burned down the entire library of research and information and patient charts and everything. So that's what, I mean, Pride is about remembering our history and trying to do better in the future is really what it is.
And we know when we think about our rights and our visibility, what Stonewall did for us back then.
Exactly.
But how do you think pride has impacted our rights and visibility now?
Well, and that's the thing is I deal as a trans person, I deal with so much misunderstanding of the past. So, for example, and I've seen this happen a lot recently online. Is a lot of individuals are very anti-trans because they insist that that was not part of the history. Um, so it's interesting because back then we forget the fact that they were transphobic. So the very first Pride March, the trans women um, were not actually allowed to march either with the lesbians or with the gays. They actually marched first because they weren't allowed to be there.
Hmm.
And people don't know that, so they think, obviously we love Marsha P. Johnson, but we forget about the history of the fact that she was not actually allowed to march in the first march. And that's happening now. We have a lot of people with the LGB without the T, and they're not understanding that, so much of our history is following that same kind of closed mindset, despite the fact that, this these changes that were made, this riot and everything, were made by people who were sick of not being able to be the identity that they want, not being able to be with who they want. And, that's it, it's horrible to see that we're still in the same mindset, is
No,
essentially.
and it seems like we've actually taken a few steps back
Yeah,
with,
exactly.
with the
And
way
it's
it's going.
it's it's crazy, and I just don't understand how to. I'm myself learning in this time, trying to understand how to properly bridge that gap that people seem to have against, the trans community.
Hmm. Well, what do you hope others understand about Pride when they either participate or they're just there as a spectator?
My thing is, and I've learned it's the biggest thing about Pride is being able to learn. I've had so many people when I was going to Pride in Orlando and Tampa and St. Pete. I have people approach me all the time regarding my puphood and things. But the biggest thing is seeing the trans community actually come up. So if you wear a trans flag, you're more likely to be obviously approached. One of the biggest things that ever happened to me was I have a lot of younger trans people come up and approach me about the puphood and everything. But that's not just it, is so many of them also are able to be like, wait a minute, there's like another community that might actually allow me to come into it. Um, so for example, like in the, we did Trans Day of Visibility, the event on Saturday. I can't even tell you how many younger trans kids had come up to us and were asking questions and were saying, wait a minute, like, I've always loved Tom of Finland, but, I didn't fit the aesthetic. I didn't think that I could be part of leather. And my kids, I mean, like, 18, 19, 20 year
Right.
olds, but, it's amazing that you're able to like as these spectators, as these kids, their parents, and everyone come up and start to learn. I mean, that's the whole point of Pride, is basically creating the space where people can learn that they can be whatever they want. They don't have to fit this, one specific role in their life. And that's actually something that I used to mentor a lot of trans kids. And one of the biggest things I ever told them was, you don't have to have one label for the rest of your life. If you
Yeah.
change, which people change, you can have a different label. So you may first identify as bisexual, and then later down the road you realize, oh, maybe I'm actually just gay, or maybe maybe it turns out I'm trans and I'm a lesbian now, and I'm a trans woman who's a lesbian, and things change. But
Hmm.
that's the biggest thing, is I tell parents, I tell the trans kids, I tell even just young queer kids, like, you are allowed to change, you're allowed to find new things, and there is a place for you in the community, no matter where you look.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in your view, how can pride help to create positive change within our society?
So for a lot of times, whenever I go to Pride, one of the biggest things we do is the parade. So the biggest changes that you can really see, and the biggest things that you can do, is basically just learn. You can open up yourself to finding different things, and I mean, Pride itself just allows us to be able to expose ourselves to other people of other things, other cultures, other everything you can think of. The only downside is, and we're seeing this now, is corporations who were, you know, representing Pride are now backing out. I
Yeah.
think that actually happened. I'm not sure on the exact city. I think it was either Los Angeles or San Francisco. They're now having to do a fundraising because Anheuser-Busch actually just backed out, and they're down by $100,000. And after being a sponsor for 30 years and backing out, and putting them down the hole for 100K. That's one thing that I want people to know, is that these corporations are not your friend.
Right.
um
Right.
they're not your friends. They hand you out free things that have their stuff on, and the second that it was no longer benefiting them, or they felt like they didn't have to show face, now they get to back out. And that's the biggest thing, is I always see a lot of allies show up to Pride, and sometimes they're not really allies. They're more just like, hey, this was a cool event that we could go to get free stuff,
Yeah.
but I'm not actually here to support the community. And that's another thing, is I hate to see all the people that just wear trans support t-shirts, but have no interest in actually supporting the trans community either.
Yeah.
I obviously I've seen a lot of that on Facebook too. It's very performative, and it's sad that we're at a point where Pride is there. We have trans marches and stuff, and people are just it's just performative, and it's sad.
Yeah. No, I totally get you, and I see that. And I believe one of them was St. Louis, was also having to do a fundraiser for their Pride Parade.
That might have been it. That might have been it. Yeah.
So yeah, I've seen several now because of big corporations. I think in Minneapolis it was Target that backed out, and they're
Yep.
having to raise money for that. So
It's just crazy. I mean, I hate to say, like, the entire time I've been at Pride, I knew the corporations were not our friends. Mainly because a lot of them would, obviously misgender all the time. Like, I would go up and I would talk to them and completely misgendered, like, just not even like asking, just.
yeah,
And I've seen people be like, they'll say it to trans women, call them men, and they'll be like, I am not a man. I'm actually a trans woman, my pronouns are she, her, and then continue to just completely butcher it. And and different things, like you go to these corporations and even some of the clinics too. It's like it's just crazy to me because they it's just performative. And I knew years ago that it was all performative, and now that politics have changed, now all of a sudden that they're all backing out. And it was just one of those things where it's like we always knew that they weren't there for us, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. Well, what message do you think Pride sends to the future generation of our community?
So pride it's something that literally gives people a chance to come together and find friends and find resources. And especially, like I said, for younger generations, I've had trans kids come up to me all the time, and yeah, they're terrified. I mean, I
Hmm.
can't blame them in the slightest. This is a terrifying time. So many of us are trying to find if we might have to leave the country. I already have a lot of trans friends who are leaving the state. And I've had friends who are leaving the country. And for the younger generations right now, it's like, what do I do? So many trans parents right now are having to actually flee the state of Florida
Hmm.
because they could be charged with child abuse for seeking resources for their children. And the thing is with pride, it's something that literally is that one beacon of light. People can come together, they can see older people, so trans kids can see that there's older trans people alive. We're working, we're existing. And that for one of the biggest things that was on the internet for a while was seeing these 70, 80, 90-year-old trans men, trans women that were alive. They were alive, they were well, they had families, they had jobs, they wrote. And I mean, it was crazy because we were made to believe that, I don't know how, but they made us believe that trans people were just not going to live. Like, no matter what, we were going to be hate crimes before we ever made it to 50, 60, 70, 80 years old. And then then you see them. You actually see these older generations, these older gay men who used to be leather men, and they still are, and they still have their leather, and they're taking photos. And I mean, there's nothing that beats that for children to be able to see that there's a future for them.
Right.
And I think Pride does that.
Yeah. Well, it's always amazing to get to catch up and talk to you for a little bit. I know you're busy as well, and I'm glad you were able to carve out some time for me.
Yeah, well, I'm always grateful to come on here because, obviously you changed so many people's perspectives and lives. I have people come up to me and talk to me about how they saw me on your podcast, and I'm like, honestly, you reach so many incredible people.
Well, that's
And
good to hear because I don't always get to hear that piece of it, but it's good to know.
it makes a huge difference for so many people.
I've slowly started getting a few more reach out wanting to do the trans podcast that I've got going on. So I'm only doing it, posting them 2 times a month instead of every Friday. But
Hmm.
I think I've now got enough built up that I'm into June.
Oh, that's awesome. I
So yeah,
love that.
I'm enjoying it. But well, again, thank you for being on here. Hopefully, I'll get to see you sometime soon. Hopefully before June. Uh,
Oh, well, oh yeah,
I'll,
for
I'll
sure before June. Yeah, well, that's crazy it's been. Definitely before June, but oh my gosh, yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thank you.